Welcome, everyone. I'm Alene Scoblete of the South Shore Audubon Society based in Freeport, New York, and I have the great pleasure today of interviewing Dr. Douglas Tallamy. Doug Tallamy of the University of Delaware is an entomologist, wildlife ecologist, and conservationist. His books include Nature's Hope Best Hope, Bringing Nature Home, and The Nature of Oaks. Through his writing, life, and work, he has urged us to turn our properties into engines of biodiversity and has shown us the best ways to go about it. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I like that, engines of biodiversity. I like the term.
Good. Okay, so first question, in your youth, what sparked your interest in insects?
I had no interest in insects in my youth. I knew nothing about them. I was born loving nature, but insects, I spent a lot of time in the woods when I was growing up, and the insects I ran into most were horseflies and deer flies that wanted to bite me. So I was good at swatting them. I like turtles and snakes and the things that little boys like, but it wasn't until junior year college, I took a course in entomology, and knowledge generates interest, and they're interesting things. And that's what turned it all around, was taking a course in college. I guess that's why we go to college, but.
I think you're right. Okay, and in your youth, what inspired your interest in conservationism?
Well, I grew up in a development in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. Our house was the first house to be built in this, on one particular circle. So I watched all the other houses being built, and the lot next to us was the last house to be built. And there was a pond on that lot, and I used to go to the pond all the time. And in the spring, there were toads that bred there, and they laid their eggs, and the little guys developed. So, that was my first real exposure to nature, one-on-one. And I was sitting next to that pond one day when, just as the little toads were hopping out, and the bulldozer came and buried the pond. And I don't think the guy saw me there. He would have buried me too if I hadn't run away. But I mean, that made an impression on me. Right then I said, well, gee, we've got too many people burying ponds around here. What was interesting is that my response to that was what everybody else's response was. We've got to save the places that are not already destroyed. I never once thought about actually putting a pond on my property. Could have gotten my shovel out that day and replaced that pond, but it didn't occur to me. It didn't occur to me till what, 30 years later or something. So yeah, that was that. I realized we're just using things up way faster than they're being generated. And that happened early on.
And you refer to Aldo Leopold, known as the father of conservationism, and the eminent biologist Edward O. Wilson as the dreamers. How did their dreams influence you?
Well, Aldo Leopold, early on, in the first part of the 1900s, recognized that we were destroying functional ecosystems at an alarming rate, and we didn't even seem to recognize it. There was no recognition that we even needed these ecosystems, that, soil erosion was rampant, deforestation. It was a very rough time with very little conservation going on. Market hunting. I mean, it was shortly after we wiped out the bison and the passenger pigeon and many other things. So he talked about developing a land ethic. He said, look, we really have to have reverence for the nature that supports us. We can use the land, we can farm and lumber and do all of those things, but we can do it gently enough that we don't destroy the nature that supports us. So that, who can argue with that? That certainly would influence anybody. E.O. Wilson was an entomologist. He died the day after Christmas this year. So it was a big loss, not just to entomology, but to conservation, because one of the things that was consistent throughout his career was his effort to save life on Earth. He loved biodiversity, but he didn't want to save it just because he loved it. He knew it was essential. That is what kept us alive on planet Earth. And in 2016, he wrote Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life, where he said, we have to save nature on half of planet Earth or we're going to lose life everywhere. It's a pretty stark statement, and I'm glad he made it. It got people thinking. Of course, we're a long way from saving nature on half of planet Earth. So the next question is how you do it. So thinking about how to meet E.O. Wilson's dream, how to make it a reality, has directed a lot of my work. There's no way we're going to do this in a humans here, nature someplace else. Because we've got half of planet Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and 8 billion of us are stuffed in the other half. There's not a third half to put aside for nature. So how do the only model that's going to work is if we live together. If we find ways for nature and humans to actually coexist. And if we do that, it'll be the first time, at least for the large Western and Asian societies. And that's what I've been working on. I think we can live together. I mean, Cindy and I are doing it at our house. It's a lot of fun. It works. And there's no reason why we can't build landscapes that share that space with other species. No reason that we can't do it. It's the only option that's left to us. So how do we change the culture so that we do it? It's not hard, but we do have cultural constraints against it.
Could you describe those cultural constraints?
Well, we've got this notion that we can't coexist with nature. The media is vilifying nature every step of the way. If you go outside, you're going to get eaten by a cougar. You're going to get Zika virus. Something terrible is going to happen to you. That's no way to start sharing your properties. People are afraid to do it. It was our history with nature was a competitive one. In the very old days, it was the natural world that killed us. There were predators out there that ate us, and we had floods that drowned us, and ice storms that wrecked our crops, and all kinds of things. So the people who could beat back nature the best were the ones that survived the best. That model doesn't work anymore because we've now beaten back nature right off the planet, and we've missed the point that we absolutely need natural systems to produce the life support that we all depend on. So we've got to hit a happy compromise. We don't have to have lions and tigers and bears and mastodons in our front yard, but we do have to have functional ecosystems, and that includes plants that are willing to share their energy, particularly with insects and all the birds and the butterflies and everything else that eat those insects. We need the pollinators so that we have those plants. If you're looking at one group of insects that is absolutely essential, it's pollinators, because without them, we lose 90% of the flowering plants. That's not an option. And it has nothing to do with our crops. It's not about pollinating a third of our crops. It's about keeping the world green, which moderates weather systems and produces oxygen and all the other things that it does. So this is where E.O. Wilson says insects are the little things that run the world. And that's another huge thing that he did that influenced me. He did it way back in 1987. It is all about insects. So
next up, I'm going to ask you to describe the yard in which nothing moves.
That's a typical yard. We have 44 million acres of lawn in this country. That's an area bigger than the size of New England. And when you look at it in your lawn, particularly if you take care of it the way the commercials tell you to take care of it, it's dead. There's nothing out there except grass. There are no pollinators. There's no carbon sequestration. You've wrecked the watershed, and you're not supporting the food web. Those are the four things every landscape has to do. Now, a typical yard has a few trees, but if it's an Asian ornamental, if it's a calorie pear, if it's a ginkgo, if it's all kinds of things that are pretty but do not support food webs, they are unable to pass on the energy they've captured from the sun because our insects can't eat them. That's what I mean by dead landscape. It's not supporting the biodiversity that we need.
So for bird lovers whose property is replete with ornamentals, what initial changes can we make to support birds?
A number of things. I talk about reducing the size of the lawn. I don't talk about getting rid of it. It's a perfect plant to walk on. It's a cue for care, so you won't be thrown out of your neighborhood. You'll still have manicured lawn, but you're going to have less of it. And you're going to put the plants that I call them keystone plants. They're supporting food webs best. And by that, I mean the the insects that pass on energy, actually the animals that pass on energy from plants to other animals more than anything else are caterpillars. And it turns out that 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. So let's just say birds need caterpillars, particularly when they're reproducing. You need the plants that make those caterpillars. So I call oaks the best keystone plant. They support 952 species of caterpillars nationwide that we know of. Compared to something like a tulip tree, it's a good native plant, but only supports 21. So there are huge differences among our native plants in the amount of bird food that they're making. And we want to focus on those top producers, the oaks and the native cherries, the willows, birches, hickories. Those are really top producers. If we don't have them in our yard, we won't make the thousands and thousands and thousands of caterpillars necessary to make one clutch of chickadees. So how can we fix that? You got to put those plants in your yard, even if you, and start small. Plant an acorn. It's free. It's easy. The only hard part is keeping the deer from eating it, but that will get you going. And that single acorn will do an awful lot of things over the years. Most of them will be very beneficial to the birds.
Could you tell us about homegrownnationalpark.org?
Homegrown National Park is, I got this idea years ago when I saw the statistic of how many acres we have in lawn. Back then it was 40 million acres. And I said, gee, what would happen if we cut that in half? That would give us 20 million acres we could put towards conservation right at home. I said, gee, we could create a new national park. How big would that be? And I started adding up all the big national parks, and 20 million acres is bigger than all of them combined. So I said, well, gee, we could have the biggest national park in the country. It's going to happen at home, so we'll call it Homegrown National Park. And I talked about it for a long time, and I wrote a chapter about it in Nature's Best Hope, but that's all I did. And then I met a woman, Michelle Alfandari, who said, you've got to go beyond this. You've got to actually create a nonprofit that's going to get this message to the millions and millions of people who don't know anything about it. And that's what Homegrown National Park is all about. It's a nonprofit designed to reach the non-choir, to get the message that conservation is everybody's responsibility, not just tree huggers, because we all need healthy environments, and that your property is a perfect opportunity to practice this conservation, to exercise your responsibility to good earth stewardship. Most people don't know that, though, and that's what the website is designed to do. When you join Homegrown National Park, it's free, first of all, and you register your property, where it is, and the amount of area you're going to be a good steward of. So if you plant that oak tree, how much space is that going to take up? You put that on there. If you actually do reduce the area of lawn, you put that area on there. If you put one aster in a flower pot, you're going to help that migrating monarch, and that little bit of area goes on there. So the goal is to change the culture as much as it is to get acreage in conservation. You know, we have this 30 by 30 initiative. It's a UN initiative. We're going to save 30% of the planet by 2030. 50% by 2050. That's E.O. Wilson's Half Earth project. We're not going to do that if we don't do conservation on private property. And right now, there's no record of that. We've got Audubon, we've got National Wildlife Federation, we've got Wild Ones, we've got all kinds of organizations doing good conservation work on private property, but we want to coalesce all of these efforts into one visual. We call it the map. And everybody can join, even though you belong to another organization, because we don't charge. We're not pulling membership away. And this way we can see how close are we getting to that 30-30 goal. It's, what is it, 2022 now? We got 8 years to get everybody on the map. So
as we progress in converting our property over to native plants, we are adding to our to the Homegrown National Park. We're putting that in as we go along.
That's right. And at this point, we want everybody to join. So even if it's a pledge, this is what I plan to do. You do not have to wait until that oak is 20 years old before you put it on the map. Yeah, it's really, you're signing up saying, I'm on board now, and this is what I'm going to do. So.
And how can we best provide native plant habitat under drought conditions?
Well, droughts have always been part of our climate. Everything is more severe now. Native plants in the right place, in the right biome, are good at handling drought. So first of all, put the right plant in the right place. That's the same with native or non-native. We don't want to put water-loving plants in high dry areas. But one of the things, the reason we have prairies in the Midwest is because of lack of rain. And all the plants, those prairie meadow plants, are adapted to low rainfall. They have very deep root systems. So liberally using meadow plants, things like goldenrod and the native bunch grasses and things, those are all drought resistant plants. They have root systems that go very deep and tap into the soil moisture. I would say your best defense against drought is to use the plants that belong where you are. Most of them are very good at it. The mega droughts they're having in the Southwest, they haven't seen that in 25,000 years. That's tough on those plants. And it's, so I can't solve that today, but
that's very good advice.
Yeah.
All right. And what is the way to get friends and neighbors on board with converting one's property to native plants?
Boy, that has been my biggest challenge for the last 20 years. How do we reach the people who are not inherently interested in this? There are more people interested in it, they just don't know it. So it's a matter of spreading the word. That's why I write the books. That's why I give the talks. It's why I do these interviews. But most people still are not exposed. So I am open to suggestions. I've thought about having a bring your neighbor night. The person who just isn't on this wavelength, they don't recognize that we have an issue. Most people get it that we've got a climate change crisis, but far fewer people realize we've got a biodiversity crisis at the same time. And if we had no climate change crisis, we would still have a biodiversity crisis because we have not been sharing our human dominated spaces. How do we get that message across? What's helping are major media outlets like New York Times and Washington Post. They've got these big headlines, insect apocalypse is here, and we've lost 3 billion birds, and the UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction. People are reading that. So it's not as buried as it used to be. But now the next question is, how do we get them to realize that they are the solution? These are grassroots problems. Most people say, what can one person do? Well, that's what I outline in my talks. There's 10 or 12 things one person can do and make a big difference on their piece of the earth. That's your responsibility. You're not responsible for the whole planet, but you are responsible for that property that you say you own. Okay, you own the responsibility of taking care of it too. And they're easy things. One person can do them. So anything you think of that will get this message to other people, great. And what you're doing right now, recording this, is a good step. So.
And that brings us to the State of the Birds 2022 findings, saying that more than half of U.S. bird species are declining. 70% of newly identified tipping point species have each lost 50% or more of their populations in the past 50 years and will lose another half in the next 50 years if nothing changes. Do you want to address that?
We can't continue with nothing changing. And so one of the messages of Homegrown National Park is that this is urgent. These issues are urgent. We are above the carrying capacity of planet Earth with the way we use resources at this point. And how do I know that? I know that because we're using resources faster than they're regenerating. And you can see that in 1,000 ways all around you. So we can say, oh, we're going to use fewer resources, but yes, we have to do that. We have to be more mindful about how we use them, but we also have to regenerate what we've wrecked. That 44 million acres of lawn isn't producing any resource. It could be. The life support on our planet is plants. We've got to put the plants back. So that's what Cindy and I have done at our house. We have 10 acres. It was mowed for hay. There was nothing here. We put the plants back, and I'm counting the number of moss species that are now making a living here. I'm up to 1,195 species so far that have come back since we put the plants back. So That's what's exciting to me, is that it's doable. What would it be like if everybody put the plants back? You know what? This is not rocket science. You just put the plants back and we can turn this around.
And on a happier note, what birds thrill you every time you see them?
I was just down in coastal South Carolina, where they have the painted buntings. That's a beautiful bird. I like to see them. You know, the bird that excites me every time I see it is the new bird that I've never seen before. There are a lot of people like that. So, but you know, the migrants come through every year. We just had the ruby crowned kinglets foraging all over the place. It's like seeing old friends again. So it's you can see them over and over again, and it warms your heart. What the message is that, look, things have not totally disintegrated. These birds are still alive. I see the blue jays moving the acorns. You know, blue jay, it's a common bird, but it's still fun to see. Just to see it happening is what I enjoy the most.
And what are your favorite insects and why?
I really do like Lepidoptera now, the caterpillars and the adults. I have for a long time. There's 14,000 species of them in this country alone, so it's gonna be a while before I see them all. Why? Well, they're beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. I don't know. It's a good question. They're so important. You know, that statistic about caterpillars is, it's coincidental. I liked them even before I knew that, but they really are critical parts of our food webs. So conserving them is essential. So I don't know, all those reasons.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell us?
I want to emphasize your personal role in addressing these issues. Because we all need healthy ecosystems, it is our responsibility, everybody's responsibility, to take care of them. We've had this crazy system in the past where we have ecologists and conservation biologists, and everybody else has a green light to wreck the planet. That doesn't make any sense. And that's what's got to stop as soon as possible. Everybody, every corporation, everybody has got to be conducting their life with conservation in mind. If not, we're not going to beat E.O. Wilson's goal, and we're all going down the tubes. That's how important it is. So,
and now, how can viewers find you online?
Our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, is where it all is. So,
okay, and thank you very much for this interview. We just really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.